So let's talk about what happened. We had Orisa mirrors, we had some dive step opening up, then a couple of things happened, okay? Some of this stuff is going to be old news for you guys, but Orisa got nerfed. So what ended up happening is we had a lot of like tank, rock, paper, scissors that ended up just being go back to Orisa. Because Orisa basically did well versus Mauga, Orisa did pretty well versus Ram, Orisa did pretty well versus Reinhardt, and Orisa was overall a pretty strong character with some decent push-pull. And you played Sojourn Tracer because Sojourn was pretty strong, and Tracer was pretty strong. Well, two things happened. Orisa got nerfed really hard. So then now there was actively kind of more of a rock, paper, scissors available that was more opened up. And then Tracer also got nerfed. Not major nerf, it was just the recall nerf. And the one that we talked about being more significant at this level of play was the pulse bomb nerf. So it was a lot harder to land pulse bombs because at the pro level, everybody gets close. Everybody can get close to landing a pulse bomb. And that meant that with the pulse bomb being the way it was, it was really easy to land pulse bombs at this level. And so they were just fight winning kills. And now all of a sudden that wasn't the case anymore. So what ended up happening is that the meta started to shift. Sigma started to be more playable because Sigma did well versus Orisa, but Orisa was still just the better choice most maps, right? And so now you had like, okay, Mauga is actually viable again because you can actually use Mauga and not just to instantly die now. Also Mauga lifesteal, OP. We can give lifesteal to a lot of characters like Genji, Venture, and so on, and you can just cheat off angles and just do whatever you want, okay? Now, what ended up happening is a bunch of different teams had different interpretations of what the best solution was because number one, these teams were not scrimming each other. They were not region locked because teams were scrimming each other, but they were not scrimming each other constantly. In OWL, the same teams were scrimming each other over and over and over and over again. A really good team would find a meta. Everyone would try to copy, not everyone, but a lot of teams would try to copy, and it just became about who was able to adjust quicker. At this level, Ints didn't scrim freaking Crazy Raccoon. Okay, so they didn't know what Falcons were going to run out on or Crazy Raccoon was going to run on, and these guys didn't have practice necessarily as much versus this. Now, there was a little bit of scrimming leading up to the event, but it was limited, right? So teams really were going to stick to their guns. Not to mention the fact that I think most of these teams are at this point pretty much strength pilled to where like Vestola knows that they're not going to beat these guys in a Amalgamir. They're not going to beat these guys in a Divemir. So people are going to play to their strengths, especially when the meta is fresh. And you got to give credit to the Overwatch 2 devs for something. There's a lot of patches. There's a lot of patches. Cheers, Cyber, because it's very hard to predict what's going to be meta. So what Ince's solution is that Cassidy's pretty strong. Season 9 buff's pretty good. Tracer's still good, especially if you have Kevster. And we have the best Sigma maybe in the world. And we have a guy that's really good at BAP. So let's kind of play our brawl variation with Poke Tracer still, because we don't need something that can group up and get value out of Mauga lifesteal. And because you can shield Mauga, you can deny a lot of his lifesteal. And because we have cast BAP, we can also poke the guy out pretty well. So let's try and make this work versus the Mauga comp and see how it goes. Whereas Falcons, they're thinking, hey, we don't have Orisa. We can't match these guys as well on Sigma. Rein's not good. Ram's okay, but a lot of teams were avoiding Ram because Ram just gets turb stomped by Mauga, right? And also these teams may not be the best Rams ever. I think a lot of the Korean teams historically have not been as good at Ramattra. And so they're like, hey, let's play Mauga. Mauga, we take angles, we 3-2-1, we can slam past shield quickly as long as we don't take too much damage. Cardiac on backline, lifesteal for Lucio, lifesteal for Genji, maybe Venture, maybe Pharah, depending on the compositional setup. And let's see how it goes. And so a lot of these teams were just trying these different theories, and we're going to continue to go down. And the worst part about this is that this actually was a lifetime evolution too. Teams were changing their approaches. I heard stuff about Toronto VOD reviewing like 2 a.m. the night before a match. A lot of teams were making last-second adjustments based off of the results of the previous day. Like this Venture stuff, it's a character benefits immensely from the lifesteal. So you just take an off angle versus a Sigma, you hard it on backline, and there you go. The May stuff, this is obviously a good point for May. I was talking with Chris. He was saying that some teams were trying to use May whenever the Maugas were using Overon to try to stop him from running. Because if you could stop him from running and slamming, then you've killed the push. You don't wall behind the Mauga because they just go around the wall anyway, especially if they're running Kiriko. But you try to prevent the run slam from happening anyway. But it's really, really hard to do. So that was like the initial evolution. And that's where we started to see things like Pharah being played, Genji being played, because you had characters that could just kind of like cheat, because Tracer's a little bit weaker. You're like, okay, so what flanker do you play instead? And like, well, Pharah's pretty good, especially if you can give her lifesteal, and you don't need to worry about getting poked out by Tracer as much because Tracer's not as popular. And then we had this whole like this nonsense, right? So I talked to Majid right before this match, and he says, get ready, because I'm not a Zen OTP anymore. I'm like, all right, you know, he says, don't leak it. I'm like, all right, I won't leak it, right? Because obviously they're about to play. So what ended up happening here is you have these like brawl heavy teams that want to push point. Oh my days.
Do you think that the new competitive scene is more interesting?
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. It's the level of play has dropped a little bit because the top teams aren't scrimming each other as much. There's more region lock. There's less payment, so more good players have retired. But yeah, absolutely. So what ends up happening is you have like basically let's push cart comp here, and then let's poke you from a distance, and then run high damage character, sightline character. And the reason you run Lifeweaver is because Lifeweaver can do pretty decent tank shield damage if you could just shoot down a choke. But the more important reason, if you guys didn't notice this pretty quickly, is that it's a grip barrage. You could pocket your Pharah and then just grip barrage cheese. And honestly, Tree's not even a bad ultimate at this point as well. So this is just a bit of a cheese that they whipped out versus the more brawly comp. And in fact, it's why Ints goes Sigma here. I think if they had been off of that, they might have considered going more Ram. So they're like, yo, we could just poke these guys out. So this is an interesting adjustment. Let's keep going here. This is just another variation of the quote unquote, we'll call it Mauga dive here, because it's essentially what it is. It's basically group up, 3, 2, 1, rotate in. It's like, basically playing high mobility comps that benefit from lifesteal. Echo is just more of a point-specific character. And again, Ints really likes the Cassidy Tracer because it plays into their strengths, and they think that they have a chance. Versus these dive-year comps. Dive on first point here, this is not really a meta evolution. This is just a variation of dive. It's just fun to me. Like, you guys could really see that, like, Tracer's just not as popular for these guys. It's not their first choice all the time because the character's a little bit worse. Now, this one was more of, let's play more open space on first point. That's why we're playing Hanzo. And because and this is another little variation that we've seen as well. Sorry, I'm just like monologuing here. We'll do some Q&A after we get through this, but there's a lot of discussion to get out here. Why Hanzo? Well, because Cassidy. Because you're thinking this is a big open space. There's no dive threat here. I just play Hanzo versus Cassidy, and yeah, I don't have the one-shot, but I'm basically mid-range pressure, but better. And I don't need the survivability because you guys are playing Cassidy, Sigma, Baptiste. There's nothing that's going to actively dive on me. Also, the range is a little bit broader. So this is a very point-specific cheese. And in fact, I think Stalker should swap. I think he does swap after pretty quickly here. Yeah. Probably next death, maybe even. Yeah, so the next death, okay, so then now the points are more congested. We need to run something that benefits more of the group up, lifesteal, go past Sigma. And for this comp to work, and this is why I think SSG failed with the Sigma, is you need a really good Sigma that's able to hit shots consistently and also hit accretions after the slam. Like, you have to punish people for committing. Like, right there. Do you see it? 3, 2, 1 pass shield, slam backline, cardiac. He just killed the dive. Like, it might still work because it's broken, but like, he really made that dive. He bought time for Ints to actually use their beat instead. And that's what you need your Sigma to be able to do. And I think that's where Hadi was struggling, because the mechanics, he's just not as comfortable mechanically with that character. Okay, we'll keep going here. We'll move on to another match, and we'll talk more about, again, more of the evolution here. Maybe had a similar idea. They wanted to run Pharah. Again, it's just a choke-oriented map. So if you're able to utilize the lifesteal and commit, you can even lifesteal barrage, cardiac slam with barrage. The big change there is like the Kiriko versus Baptiste. That was just more of a stylistic change. Kiriko has a little bit more range pocket, can go around stuff. The Baptiste, if you're able to keep him alive, gets a lot of damage, a lot of pressure, but he is vulnerable to being 3-2-1 run down and slammed. You guys saw that with the SSG versus Crazy Raccoon. Landon had a really bad time, and Landon's the best Baptiste in the world. So we'll keep going. Okay, so let's talk about the Brig. Okay. Brig sucks. I think this is actually brain rot. I think this is a really, really stupid adaptation. Basically, what was happening is that people were saying, okay, you can't boop the dive anyway, so you might as well play a character that can give a little bit of inspire, can maybe bash out of the engage, and then it can pocket your flanker and maybe control a different off angle that way. The problem with that is I think it's really bad on King of the Hill because you need to be able to move and rotate. And I also just think that Brig, when ult fights get messy, just folds over. At least Lucio can move away, Brig can't. Brig bash isn't enough. I hated this. I hated this from SSG. I hated this from M80. I don't think the pocket on your DPS was a good enough argument. And so really Crazy Raccoon bullied this Brigitte over and over and over again because she was too slow to reposition. She was too fragile to do anything. And packs on your BAP it just wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. You needed to trust that your BAP could handle spacing good enough to survive. But the Brig by herself just wasn't going to do enough. It just wasn't going to do enough. So I'm going to give you the TLDR of like why they were running that. I even asked Chris about it, but I just think it sucks. I think it sucks. I just don't like the Brig Wood versus the Lucio stuff at all. So how is the Pharah supposed to play with a BAP Lucio? So basically the Pharah plays more conservative. She doesn't take as greedy angles until the Mauga commits. Then she takes a greedy angle with the cardiac lifesteal. And then she basically heals herself. It's all about like, you're not like having these like long, slow poke phases. You're going like a 3-2-1 group up, run in, and these very aggressive timing windows. Very passive, 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 passive. Snap your fingers and you play around that cardiac timing. It's a very, what we like to call like, no joking aside, tempo, where at that timing, the character plays very, very, very aggressively. Okay, this is just, to be frank with you guys, this is just Ram versus Sigma. People like Ram versus Sigma. Character can punch through shields, can basically just walk through stuff. And if there's not a lot of CC, he can be okay. This is Crazy Raccoon wanting to control high grounds. And this is where the Brigitte makes sense because the Ram Lucio can't reach the Brig. So that she could actually do her thing. She can actually control space, the pocket. Ironically, Brig is actually good on high ground if you can actually set her up on high ground. Can Lucio also soft pocket an angle? He can, yes. It's just harder with a character like Pharah. So again here, I think like M80 has a hard time. This is where, frankly, I feel like something like a Curie Lucio would have made more sense from M80, just so they could actually like aggressively rotate on high ground and maybe apply some flank pressure on them to squish your DPS. But a lot of the Pharah stuff, whenever you see it, is not because like Pharah's all of a sudden unbelievably broken, but because Tracer's a lot worse, not a lot worse, but a little bit worse, and Pharah's rework has actually opened up options. And this is a good point for Pharah. So you're only going to see Pharah on points where she's actually good. And that's kind of like the main takeaway there. Okay, we'll keep going here. This is like pretty obvious, right? This is just Winston versus Sigma is pretty good when you have the verticality for it. I think Ince knows this, which is why they run it with the Tracer, because Tracer's ironically a good anti-dive character because you can mark their Tracer. And then this is just basically we play Winston on a Brig because it's a good dive map. And this is definitely Shock's best comp, at least from what we've seen. And in the leading up to this, they actually were competing with Toronto at points, who is obviously a pretty good dive team as well. So they wanted anywhere they could force Winston dive, they're going to try to do it. And it went pretty competitively. Now, I want to point out something here. We've talked about this already, but this is some wide open space. This is a team that probably doesn't want to run something like a Wrecking Ball Mirror or a Curie Lucio dive or anything like that. And this is a wide open map. So why not go full greed mode? I think Infected is 17. And go double flex support, poke, long sightlines with a Widow, poke, and then a wide open map for Ball Tracer to be able to set up angles. This is the map where Shock lost because they had the better comp here. Vestola, Sigma is basically only allowed to sit on point here. Even with Lucio speed, Sigma can't catch these guys without just dying. So this is like, I won't bore you guys with the details here, but basically I really like this comp from Shock. It could have worked really well. They had the kit for it. Infected is a really, really good Wrecking Ball. They just fumbled the bag macro-wise and ultimate-wise. I won't bore you with the details, but yeah. Thank you. Now this is, again, Midtown was picked a lot because Midtown first point is so odd. Like this tunnel here is kind of useless, right? And so a lot of it's like choke oriented, but it's also open space. That basically this is everyone's pet map for a secret strategy. Shock is going to run a really, really aggressive backline in terms of like, okay, maybe not a really aggressive backline, but a really aggressive couple of heroes with Idiari, Ashe, very greedy, a lot of damage, very fragile to dive. And they're going to pair it with Rack basically sitting in Narnia, and any of these people get pushed hard, he pulls them out to safety. The problem is they just didn't execute it very well. I think this is a pretty cheeky strategy. I think it could work. The one problem is that when you pull the Ashe out, she can't really reestablish an angle. But the strategy here is basically, we know you're going to play some form of like Tracer. Vestola plays Diva because, hey, they're playing very aggressive dive. Sigma could have worked here as well, frankly. But they want to kind of rotate on top of them. The problem is that if you look at it here, there should be something missing on your screen. And it's just, there's just no viable hit scan pressure at all, right? Like this is not what you want to see. This is not what you want to see. You need to see like Cal's here, Ashe rotating out right side, and then Rack is kind of like playing somewhere between them and can help both. But basically what had to happen is it looks like PGE got pushed out and then never really retook an off angle. And then when you see this kills the whole point of the Lifeweaver. Like you've taken 0 off angles now. So this was like, honestly, like the comp was fine, but the execution from NRG was like really, really, really bad, and it's just kind of ran them over. We'll keep going here. So I'm trying to explain like all the niche strategy. This is just dive mirror, but Ints can't play dive. Vistola plays high ground hero with the diva, but Ghost cannot play dive characters very well, and they basically just try to force cart, and Ghost tries to keep the Cassidy alive and shoot people, and that's pretty much about all they can do. And it just failed. This is just hero limitations. It's not a good comp. I'm not going to even look at M80 Twisted Minds. It was a disastrous map. I feel bad for those players. Let's keep going. So, at this point in time, people are starting to get nervous about the Mauga comps because Mauga is looking really good, even versus the Sigma stuff, if you're able to commit past the choke. Now, let's talk about what SSG is looking at here. Everybody knows SSG is going to run the Ram. They're going to sit their booty cheeks on point, and you're looking like, why Ram over Rein? I'm not sure. I think it might be that Ram has an easier time pushing and punishing things, and maybe is a little bit more self-sufficient. I'm honestly not too sure why the Ram over the Rein. It just might be a hero strength thing. Like the Ram just feels better. Maybe the Vortex provides some value. Maybe it's easier to reach things with the Ram on this point than it is with the Rein because you have that extra range with your punch. It's kind of hard to say, but the theory of the comp is this, it could be the slow, right? But the theory of the comp's the same, right? You're going to take short off angles around point and just try to stall for point percentage. And these guys obviously know that this is coming, right? They run Pharah. They're going to run Lucio because Lucio is really good in this map. Lucio basically plays like an extra tracer. You take high guard, you poke out, and then Doomfist is really good versus this comp minus the Cassidy because he could just basically ignore Ram for the most part and just cycle high ground and go for backline. And no spoilers here, but okay, I'm going to spoil it. SSG does a really good job like taking angles, taking flanks, hard marking, land and dominates. A proper Sparker was dominating Stalker. In general, like I think this is just really, really well played by SSG, and they're able to just kind of stall point while still taking creative flanks, and that is where SSG is the best, right? Like if they could take angles, like you can even see the setup here, right? Like Ram's pushed up here, Tracer's on an island here, Cassidy wide peeking here. They're constantly like kind of like spreading out and making it really hard for Falcons to set up a dive here. And yeah, Psycho does a lot of good work here, preventing that Tracer from ever really being able to do what she wants to do. And this worked great. And this also works pretty well on the next round as well, if I remember correctly. Because what ends up happening is Falcons expect them to do the same comp of turtling on point, but it's actually worse. It's a lot worse on this map because even though you can get point, it's really, really easy to get poked out and spammed out now because the sim is a lot weaker because you can't two-tap. And also, you have the DPS passive to deal with. So you don't really survive and turtle on point through raw healing alone. So Space Station says, okay, maybe they think we're going to do that stupid Rein comp or Ram comp again. It would probably be Rein here because you got to block nades. So let's do like something super greedy, right? Again, the Lifeweaver Pharah combo, the Doomfist. Let's do this. And SSG big brains them. They big brain them. They take a gamble and they open Dive Mirror, but a variation of Dive Mirror that's more complemented their hero pools. And this comp beats this comp because you get caught with Lifeweaver Pharah into Cassidy Tracer Kiriko. Not good. Not good at all. Now, if they had opened Mirror or they'd opened on a Brig, they would have destroyed them. But they just big brain them. And this is the big deal in King of the Hill because it wastes a lot of time and it could give you first fight for free. And that's exactly what happens. Toronto ends probably in like 15, 20 minutes. We're trying to speed run this here. Basically, TLDR is that like, I think like SSG big brained, but they just weren't able to execute. And I think this is right here is a great example of what we were talking about. Like Space Station Gaming is on the right comp if you're trying to counter Mauga. You have high echo damage, you have high Cassidy damage. Both those characters do very well versus both. I think they do okay versus Venture Genji and also very well versus Mauga, but they're just better. They're just better. That's all it is to it. Falcons can greed the Baptiste because they like Fielder and Baptiste, but also there's no real threat to Fielder with what SSG is running. But Hadi just isn't good enough. Psycho wasn't doing enough. They just weren't. This was just skill diff. I think this comp could have worked if you'd had Vistola. This comp could have worked if you'd had like Stalker on Echo. It just wasn't good enough. And these guys are good. Like, let's be very clear. Like, Sahadi is a good Sigma. He is fine. I would even say that like he's competitive with other main tankers. Like he might not be some 1 tier, but he is good, right? But like he is just not going to be good enough. He's not going to be Vistola, and you need to be as good as Vistola to be able to beat a team like that. This one, pretty self-explanatory. Turtle on point, push point. We've seen this comp before. The exact same reason behind. The reason why they go Hanzo instead is because they're more confident that these guys are going to go full turtle comp, and they want something that's even higher damage than Widowmaker. And then this is where things get really weird. They run Brawl Mirror, but they go, you know what, guys? I think if we could just slam on BAP, I think we just kill him. And that's pretty much the theory, and it works. Lifesteal plus Cardiac. There's the spin. There's the engage. Lifesteal is being used, and you just can't live. In fact, ironically, now this comp becomes more about poking this out, preventing the setup from even happening in the first place. And again, it's like the heroes here are fine, but the Mei is hard. You got to wall off the Mauga's run. Do you see what they did there? Check this out. Check out Backbone's wall here. He's trying to go in. He walls off the engage. This isolates the Venture. So then Venture's by themselves, and then they force the lifesteal, but Venture's out. Genji's deflect, no dash. This is where, like, frankly, like, you've played this perfectly as Space Station Gaming. It's just a mechanics diff. Somebody needed to have died there. Like, somebody had to die there. They actually played that one perfectly with the Mei wall. They forced the Cardiac. They created a window of opportunity, and they just didn't. Nobody died. They should have died. And then now, because they failed on that wall there's going to be a window of opportunity here where we're going to have a slam Cardiac, and I don't think Backbone will have wall. Let's see. Goes for the wall, misses the wall, no wall, and that's it, right? And that's it right there. Right now, Hadi's in serious trouble. Huge angle. They hit the shots, but it's traded. And that's basically what ended up happening is, like, can Backbone hit the wall? Because if Backbone can't hit the wall on the run, it's really hard to, by the way. You just get cooked. It's just so hard. And you can't even run the sim because the sim just gets slammed over and over and over again. So then they try to adjust. They go, okay, well, then we're just getting slammed over and over again. Can I go Sojourn and poke out? The answer is yes, but Sparker's just not able to make it work on Sojourn. I think Sparker's Cassidy is much better than the Sojourn as well. Backbone goes Echo. Again, Echo makes total sense here. They actually adjust by going Tracer, which is good versus both of these characters, and Backbone's Echo just isn't good enough either. So it really comes down to, like, Space Station's strategy is great. The level of play needed to make the strategy work wasn't there. Not because they're bad players, but because Falcons are just too good. And even then, despite all that, it looks like we're coming down to like one fight situations here. Like these fights were so incredibly close. It's actually unbelievable. Like they really, both the last two maps came down to one fights essentially. So Falcons just wins because they're the better team. They didn't have the better strategy necessarily. They just had better players. This is honestly a desperation mode from Space Station. I'd love to talk with Chris about this. I think the idea was to try to teleport out of the slam engages, or try to basically play your sim as bait. It might have also been that they were playing to Cardiac their Symmetra and hope that the lifesteal on the enemy Mauga would be enough to keep the Symmetra alive, but basically TLDR didn't work. Because at this point, I think that, like, they were just trying something and that they went for a high risk, high reward play, and it didn't work. Crazy Raccoon versus Toronto. This is just ball tracer map. We've seen this comp. This is very similar to what they run. I think it's the exact same thing that they run in the finals versus Falcons. And it's just like, hey, let's try and take some off angles here. I think we can punish the ball. I think we can punish the Tracer Echo with our Cassidy Tracer. But it's just the map is so good, and Crazy Raccoon is just really good, and Toronto kind of fumbled the bag. I actually don't like this from Toronto. I think it's a decent strat, but I actually feel like maybe it works because Chorong's on Lucio. Lucio's not very good versus this. But actually, like I said, I really do feel like this comp is a lot worse than it used to be because I think it's so much harder to turtle on point than it used to be. So Toronto makes it work, but they really needed to swap here. Like, they needed to swap here, and they didn't. They tried to stay for Shatter. They tried to stay for Teleporter, for Simwall, but you're playing into Primal. This was just a bad decision from Toronto. They shouldn't have made it work. But the idea there is, like, okay. I just not 100% certain. This is Sigma Mirror. Crazy Raccoon likes running Bat Brig because Brig is good in poke, right? You can swing on the enemy sig, you can pocket your DPS, you're not worried about getting sped on. Toronto says, oh, you're not worried about being sped on, right? Well, we're going to run Lucio and we're going to speed on you. But Chorong is able to manage his distance because it's a Sigma and it's not like a Rein Lucio. And also Chorong is just insane at Brigitte. This is just a kind of a weird brawl spam hybrid map, and teams are just kind of shuffling around to different characters to try and make things work. I'm not going to overanalyze that one too much. And then just Mauga mirror. Difference here being, did they transition to dive in second? They might not transition to dive. Yeah, it's just Malgamir. I'm a little surprised to see them stay. Yeah, they swap off of Pharah on second because there's a little bit more open space where the Tracer could be more useful. But yeah, Toronto just gets their teeth kicked in. M80 Space Station. I mean, this is just Space Station attempting to counter the Mauga stuff with the Brigitte stuff that we talked about earlier. I really freaking hate the Brigitte. I'm not going to lie with you guys. It's just so easy to run down. And this is them running the quote-unquote right comp because you can go right through the Sigma Shield. But I don't think that M80 is as good as some of the other Mauga teams. But they're good enough to make it work because, I really hate the Brig. Poke comp, hybrid, Rein comp into the Sigma Lucio. They like the Rein Lucio versus the Sigma Lucio because you could speed rotate on top of it. And they also like the Tracer as well because the space is very, very open. And so SSG wins that one. This is the Mauga Comp 2.0. Yeah, this is the Mauga Comp 2.0. Wait, was Havana already? Oh, yeah, Havana. I forgot about Havana. Yeah, Havana was just dumb. Like, Havana was just like, this is just a skill check. It really is just a skill check. Like, the Rein, here's the theory of the Rein versus the Mauga. The theory is, if I hold shield, you can't steal. And then I shatter, and then everyone's dead. And if they're unable to take off angles, like, look at Hottie, look at Hottie, look at Hottie, look at Hottie. Like, he's just living, and then he peel pens, he punishes, and then if the Mauga can't lifesteal, you basically trade Rein Shield for a Cardiac, which is a pretty good trade. And that's how Hawk is always hemorrhaging HP. Is if his DPS are unable to set up and he's unable to deny damage, he just dies. He just dies. And that's basically what I felt like was a skill check for the Mauga teams, is could you get past the Rein? And if the answer is yes, then the Rein comp lost. If the answer was no, then it was over. And like even this here, like they lost the big ult fight and then they just ended up getting full held. And that's pretty much all there is to it. No, this is not a review. We're talking about like the meta changes and the meta shifts. This is a much better execution. I was mauling at this because I think M80's setups to get behind Rein Shield were terrible. I was like, it was absolutely full balls to the wall in a hive mind. Even when you're in a hive minding with a group up cardiac value, you'd still need to be setting up on an angle, and M80 was awful at it until they actually swapped Tracer. So it was like typical NA execution of a comp, which is why Space Station made this one competitive. I feel like a Space Station didn't adjust as well. And then again, like very, very open space. They're not confident that they're going to be able to close the distance safely with Mauga on this map, so they try Ram. It doesn't work. They try Genji. It doesn't work. They try Cassidy. It doesn't work. And they just lose. It just becomes basically a poke trade where SSG is just going to be doing so much better at the HP trades. And then we get to our map for today. So at this point in time, there's a lot of question about, can Toronto function on the Mauga comp? Is Toronto good enough at the Mauga comp to make it work? There's a lot of questions of where Toronto's advantages over ends, and it has to be Winston. It has to be Winston, because Winston's good versus these Sigma comps, and Toronto is good at Winston comps. So it's the best of both worlds. So this is basically, no spoilers for this match. We'll come back to this one in just a brief second because this is the one we're reviewing today. That's basically the TLDR of what happens here. Final day. Everyone's based in Mauga pilled. So the question is can you actually make it work? These teams don't want to play Mauga because they're confident that if we go Mauga, they're just going to go Rein or they're going to go Sigma, right? And Space Station is good enough at Rein to beat Mauga. And it's good enough at Sigma to beat Mauga. These teams are not top tier at Mauga, so they're going to take the honorable brawl trade, playing the characters that they want to enjoy. If they had gone Rein, Ram might do better versus the Rein here. If they go Sigma, the Ram definitely does better versus the Sigma. So you just basically have a Ram Brawl Mirror with teams playing characters that they feel like are good. Kevster plays Genji because Genji's good here. And remember, Tracer's a little bit weaker. Echo, Psycho's pretty good at Echo. This is a really good Echo point. So they're going to make things work. The Sojourn is just because the point is a little bit more broad. And Sojourn builds Rail on Ram pretty quickly, right? If they were playing Sigma, they probably would have stayed on the Cassidy because you don't build Rail as much just shooting a shield all day long. No spoilers here, but it basically just comes a Ram mirror with teams playing the characters that they feel most confident on. Same thing here. There's no real surprises there. No real surprises here. Although I will say that the blocked rotations from Kevster's walls were actually insane this match. Same thing here, but Ince goes, yo, I don't want to take a Ram Brawl anymore. You guys are a little bit better. I think there's enough space here to make the Sigma work. There's enough distance between me and the Ram. And it's not wrong. And that's also why they're running the Sojourn, more space, right? That's also why they're running the Tracer. Now, the main one is interesting. I think the main is to prevent the Ram from 3-2-1ing and rotating, walling behind the Ram to prevent follow-up. It turned out that wasn't really the case. That didn't really happen. As in Kevster ends up, I believe, swapping Tracer afterwards. But this was a pretty dominating performance by SSG all the way through. Almost done, chat. Almost done. Mauga. And the only takeaway from this is that Mauga definitely is Mauga with the Cardiac and the Cardiac Lifesteal stack is really, really OP. Crazy Raccoon has a really hard time winning the Mauga if they're not able to get lip on Cassidy on a good map because they cannot match the Genji Venture. They don't have the players for that hero pool. And Genji Venture with a Cardiac Lifesteal seems like the best variation. This was interesting from Raccoon. So again, they go more like a poke hybrid because there's some high ground, there's some distance here. Falcons tries to run their own variation of the Mauga with the Tracer because there's more space. And then eventually they hold... where are we looking at here? There was so we talked about this. I actually talked with Krusty about this one. My initial impression with this was that, hey, let's prevent them from going anything crazy. Let's spam the choke with their Lifeweaver Pharah. And again, like use that pull combo that we saw versus SSG. The problem is they go for the barrage and they mess it up. Check it out. Cardiac, commit, cardiac, life grip. They messed it up. He did it too soon. And so the entire combo that you're playing with screws up, and then they do something really inexplicable. I think Chio goes, oh, I almost have tree. Let's play for tree. Stalker retakes. They retake with Lifeweaver Pharah. And I was like, Krusty, what the frick, man? And he said it was a mistake. It was just a mistake. Like, they should have swapped at this point in time. They should have swapped Lucio. They should have swapped Venture, Genji, whatever, and gone back to the normal Mauga sooner. And this ends up costing them the map. But basically, the TLDR of this is that Crazy Raccoon learns that we're really not super confident in the Mauga here. I think Falcons is the better team with the Mauga. And they use that information going into the actual grand finals. You guys can check out my review of that posted today. TLDR of this match, it's not deep. Crazy Raccoon is just really freaking good at ball, and if you play ball, Echo, Tracer, and Ana, and you cycle your ults really well, it's really hard for Space Station to even mark off angles, and they lose every single ult. It's basically Space Station does the same thing, but Crazy Raccoon is the better team at punishing the whole turtle mark angle play style. It's just basically the ball is really good versus that. Like the ball, if you're a really good ball, it's really, really good. Space Station tries the Rein 3 versus the Mauga, but the difference between Crazy Raccoon and M80 is Crazy Raccoon has better players, better mechanics, and is able to get past the Rein shield. Look at how Max executes this. No damage, not taking any damage, not peeking, commit. Bam! 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 You see that? And the Genji's on top of him, right? That's what M80 was unable to do. Hawk was hemorrhaging damage. They're preventing Happy or Pelican from ever taking any off angles and getting on top of him. Every single time they ran in, they were getting on top of Landon. It just felt impossible. And it was just an execution diff. And I don't think Space Station Gaming, I think the ceiling for what Crazy Raccoon could do with their comp was higher than what Space Station could do. And Space Station just did not have the time to figure it out. They tried the Rein, it didn't work. The theory was there, it worked versus M80, it did not work versus Crazy Raccoon. So Space Station says, okay, well, we're not going to make this work. Let's try and mix it up. Let's try a map where we can maybe run some Echo Cassidy stuff again. Maybe we'll throw Hottie on Sigma. Maybe we can try and deny the poke through that. And it ends up going out quite well, even though Hottie's Sigma isn't quite there. Their alternative weird strategy definitely forced Crazy Raccoon into some different strats. They go, okay, well, let's go Doom here. Okay, let's try and mirror. And what they did is Space Station created a little bit of chaos, which normally favors the Korean teams because you could just rely off of your mechanics. The Korean teams generally have slightly better mechanical players, but maybe not, right? Sparker really good on the Cassidy this game, landed popping off on the Baptiste. Psycho had a great match as Tracer up until the very end. This was a wise choice by SSG. They knew that they weren't going to win honest Overwatch trying the same strat, so they mixed it up and it almost worked. So credit goes to them. And then I think we have the final match here. Yeah, we have the final match here, and that's pretty much where. Basically, here's where we're at. Tracer got nerfed, and Orisa got nerfed. And those were probably the two most relevant changes worth noting out. Orisa was relevant. I'm just expecting it now. Go ahead. Drive safe. Love you.
Love you.
Thanks for the food.
You're welcome.
The Orisa nerf was relevant because the Orisa was kind of like the rock, paper, scissors, end-all, be-all in the tank trades and Brawl, where you would just go, if they went Mauga, you just went Orisa and you just crapped all over him, right? And there was, with speed, Orisa could function in versus situations. But Orisa didn't just get nerfed. Orisa got smoked. So that opened up the door back for Mauga comps to be relevant and Brawl. Why was Mauga played versus Sigma and Rein? Well, Mauga definitely struggles versus Sigma and Rein if you're not able to set up off angles and commit. But if you could commit with your charge, Rein can't stop you. Sigma can't stop you. And once you pop Cardiac past the Sigma shield, you slam backline, you pop your Cardiac, you've got a Genji in there, you've got a Venture in there, everything's got AoE lifesteal. It just didn't matter that much. And that's a lot of what we saw versus the SSG stuff. So a lot of it just ended up being Malgamir is just the best Brawl variant, right? And I talked about this with, I think, 9K or Krusty, I don't remember which one, and they just basically said lifesteal and Genji OP. Now the question is okay, then why hasn't this utilized for earlier? Because it wasn't just the Orisa nerf. The other nerf that's worth pointing out was the Tracer nerf. Now, it wasn't a significant nerf. 1 second on recall, I believe. I don't know if the armor changes went through. I think they did, but it's a small change there. But the big change for Tracer was the pulse bomb. The pulse bomb. Where we went from pulse bomb, but basically being at this level of mechanics, basically impossible to kill. Now it's like, okay, now you actually have to, it's hard to land pulse bombs again. And the reason why you wouldn't run Tracer, so Tracers fall slightly out of favor here, is because Tracer's not taking angles often that benefit from those lifesteal. We talked about a group up and rush comp. Tracer's not the hero to play in that situation. Tracer's the character to play over here, but then why are you playing her if she's not benefiting from the lifesteal? So what we saw here is instead of the Sojourn, Tracer, Orisa kind of like taking off angles but playing as a Brawl unit, instead it truly became the cheating of Overwatch, where lifesteal is given to two characters and a Lucio, and that's it. Very similar to GOATs, very similar to Junker Queen Shout. We have a meta where you can cheat map control and ignore map control. And it becomes strictly a game of push-pull, ult cycles, cooldown cycles, and committing on the right targets. Thank you for the sub. I appreciate it. So you saw some teams trying to like use angles with Tracer and poke out from the side with Sigma, right? But it just wasn't enough consistently to stop the death ball from grouping up and rushing it down. So the NA Hive Mind won in terms of the... Now, obviously, we don't know if things would have changed the more things were played. But even things like Pharah being played more and Venture being played more were consequences of Tracer just not being as much of a must pick. Just not as much of a must pick. You talk about like the way a lot of the meta evolution just came from the fact that Mauga was able to hard commit with Cardiac past a lot of tanks. That wasn't Orisa because Orisa sucks. And Tracer flanker spot started to be contested because she was overall the weakest that she's been in a long time, since Season 9. And so that's why you were seeing these Genjis and these Ventures and these Pharahs, because you actually had flankers that could contest. A Pharah with lifesteal, a Genji with lifesteal, a Venture with lifesteal. Characters that can and will take off angles, but ultimately can contribute in short-range duels a lot more than Tracer. And that's what happened. And this meta evolution happened quickly, very quickly. And these teams were just really, really, really freaking good at it. The only other thing to point out here was the obvious discrepancies in terms of the support lineup. Obviously, like you're going to play Lip on Cassidy when you can because the guy's crazy at it. And while Lip does not benefit from the lifesteal, Cassidy's still strong. And with Roll, Hender, the 275 HP, he can live or survive or punish trades and pre-fight poke them as they're setting up. Okay? Not to mention just, hero strengths, guys. Like he's just good. You don't want to put Lip on Genji or Venture. You just put him on Cassidy or Tracer. Tracer's not as good. Okay, then we play Cassidy, right? The other discrepancy as well is a lot of the Baptiste and Kiriko. Again, I think this was just partly a stylistic choice. Like Baptiste is not under enough direct threat as long as there's not something like a Tracer and a Genji. Then Cassidy starts to have Baptiste has a hard time, right? Baptiste can live a single man dive, right? And so when it's 2 and 3, that's when he starts to melt instantly. And so why not play something that can put out more damage? Yes, you might lose some healing support on your Genji and Venture, but you do end up doing so much more damage on the enemy front line and the enemy flankers, okay? The other obvious answer here, and maybe this is a little bit of my conspiracy here, but I actually talked about this with 9K and Krusty, and I think they agreed. I can't remember. Anyway, Fielder's just not as good of a Kiriko. I haven't studied his Kiriko as much, but from the little bit that we saw on Raccoon versus Falcons in the grand finals, it just wasn't great. It just wasn't great. His positioning wasn't proactive enough. I know Fielder's traditionally the OP Kiriko because all he did was heal bot in 2020 and that in 2022, and that's just not as good right now. So to sum things up, some minor stylistic choices playing to character strengths, but ultimately the same functional value. AoE lifesteal in brawl comps that cheat the map control. Very similar to GOATs, very similar to Junker Queen Shout, and actually very similar to 2022 Grand Finals meta. You guys remember Winston, Kiriko, Sojourn, Tracer, Reaper? You basically had Sojourn taking an angle, and that's pretty much it. Everyone's pretty much grouped up, heal botting. Why? Because Kiriko, Kitsune, and Kiriko healing was so strong, you could cheat the map control. No, he's not the Kiriko GOAT. Not even close right now. He was the heal bot GOAT. Yes. Is Shu that great at Kiriko as well? I don't know. I assume he's fine. I'm out of the loop with who are the GOAT Kirikos right now. But I do know that Fielder did not impress the last time I watched him. Cheat the map control means that you don't take any off angles. Everybody just groups up in a giant death ball clump, and you could poke at it from multiple off angles. It doesn't matter. You have Mauga lifesteal. Doesn't matter if you have a superior Tracer angle or superior Sojourn angle. You just lifesteal, OP. Sometimes this is what happened in Overwatch 1 when Bat Brig and double shield and stuff like that was meta. You didn't need to take off angles. You just grouped. Why did Lip not play Ashe when they played ball? I mean, Ashe is just fat and slow, and you know what I'm saying? Like, she doesn't like to move, right? She's extremely potent if she can set her feet, but even in this comp here, like, even with a ball, like, you got to move, and Ashe is just not effective when she has to move. Why not Ana for anti against lifesteal? She would get run over. It's not a bad idea, but the problem is that if you run Ana here, then Kiriko Suzu's your nade, and you just fold over and die instantly. The other problem as well is that Cardiac also gives damage reduction, which means that you don't fold over instantly. You just fold over quickly. But yeah, because Kiriko, you just Suzu the nade and then you kill the Ana. Whereas the Baptiste, Kiriko, a little bit harder to nail down.
Down and these gates will open.
This is why AoE pressure is way healthier than AoE. I just think AoE sustain in general is like really dangerous. Like really dangerous. Because it makes for... Okay, here's a hot take, guys. I think that the hero meta was interesting. Especially the finals. I think we got... I think that this Mauga brawl, just because Cassidy, Genji, and Venture, I found it way less interesting to watch than it could have been. I'm not going to criticize this meta. It could have been a lot worse. But I think even though we had a decent amount of hero variety, there wasn't a lot of positioning variety, which felt like a lot of the DPS pop-off moments kind of rang hollow. You get what I'm saying? Like, there wasn't any crazy Genji flanks or Cassidy steps or Venture assassinations or Kiriko 2 taps. Like, it was pretty much just teams smashing their heads up against the wall. And a lot of the DPS pop-offs were just combos. It was just combos. It was like Cage Blade, right? Or something along those lines. So, yeah, this is after the restart. So I don't think it was a bad meta for finals, especially when they started like non-mirror stuff. But it could have been a lot better. And a lot of it is Cardiac's fault. Cardiac was really, really rough. Now, one other thing. The cool thing was that visually, they did something where they're like not just red and blue. That was cool. That made it easier to watch.
Team Falcons and crazy raccoons.
So this is kind of what we talked about, where teams are going to be more comfortable playing non-tracer characters, and what they'll do is they'll pick the character that makes the most sense on the map. This is a very high ground oriented, choke oriented map, which is perfect for Pharah. So this is where you go Pharah. Maybe not on the retake because she's a little too slow on the retake, but this is cool.
It was the winners finals and it was Falcon.
It's just a more healthy version of Ghost. Yeah, I would agree. The one redeeming factor is that the DPS choices, I find Venture, Genji, Cassidy, and Pharah to an extent, all very interesting DPS characters to watch. So I think the DPS hero choices, the DPSs that were strong, made this a much more enjoyable version of Clumper Watch to watch. So retaking off the Pharah would have been nice if they had stayed on the Pharah for longer. If they just losing that fight that quickly is kind of unfortunate. But Tracer on the retake because they have the angle now to set up for free. And I will say, Tracer does feel pretty good if you can get her onto the Baptiste. It's going to feel a lot better than versus the Kirker. So that is one of the fragility things here. So they're going to set up the angle. They're going to hard commit with Cardiac on both sides with the Tracer angle. And they're probably doing this because of BAP window. Can they keep Junbin alive? There's a Suzu. There's a Venture ult. They're able to kill Stalker. And that's it. That's really... It's really just comes down to mechanics here. Here's what they do. They go Tracer angle, brute force the angle here, pray it works. That's it. There's no nuance here at all. Slam, BAP window, Cardiac, commit from Lip, commit for Chorong, commit from Shu. The Venture ult gets killed. I think the only thing I could say there is maybe we could have seen Chorong playing a little bit more aggressively on the high ground there, just considering it is a hard commit. But really, it's just 3-2-1, and they shot people. That's all. I think all these characters are viable, really. I think maybe Mauga's the trickiest one because you will get counterpicked more in ranked. And this composition works because of not just the lifesteal for Mauga, but the lifesteal on the characters around Mauga. So I'd say Mauga's the one that's going to feel a little bit worse in ranked compared to the other characters, but I think all the other characters are pretty decent.